12:03. So I say, let us jump in. I am Cheryl Wilson-Griffin, and I'm here with LegalTech Consultants, and this is part of our AI for Smart People webinar series. It'll be our last one before Christmas. And then the series will be moving to a monthly basis in 2024. So this is our last kind of weekly one, and we're ending it strong. So we have Nicola Shaver here from LegalTech Hub, and we're going to be talking today about what's really going on behind the curtains in the law firms. And you may know Nikki, hopefully you do. She has developed one of the best legal tech directories that's available. It's very robust, and if you are a legal tech buyer, definitely something to check out. There's lots of premium resources there as well. That the thing I like is like RFPs are available and things like that that professionals have written for you. So definitely something to check out if you're a buyer, because it can save you hours and hours and hours of time. Also a really good job board there too, if you're looking for great new jobs. But I digress. Let's talk a little bit about AI for smart people. So the whole concept here is making AI more approachable. I think we've made it kind of poisonous and like unnecessarily complex when it's really much more like electricity. You need to know how to turn it on, you need to know how it can kill you, and you need to know how you can get value from it. That's it. You don't need to be a scientist. You don't need to know every single aspect of it, but you do need to understand very deeply the core stuff. And one of the things that Nikki gets to do every day in her job is talk to lawyers and talk to real life people that are trying to make this happen. And so very excited to have you with us today, Nikki, and would love to give you a chance to introduce yourself to the crowd of thousands that are out there, and let's kick this thing off.
Well, I'm so delighted to be here with you, Cheryl. Thanks so much for having me. It's funny for those of you listening, Cheryl and I were together in person in Brooklyn just a couple of days ago, and now we find ourselves virtually connected here. So great to see you again. Yes, so for those of you who don't know me, my background is legal. I practiced for quite a number of years and then worked in legal innovation in law firms for many years as well. And now with LegalTech Hub, one of the things that we have been doing since 2020 is map the legal ecosystem for legal technology tools, how they emerge, grow, develop, when they're acquired, when sadly some of them go under. And what that meant was we were in a very good position when ChatGPT emerged to really map how this industry was evolving around advanced AI, whether that was the solutions that were popping up all over the place to address specific legal use cases, or the way that legal AI was being used in law firms and corporate legal departments. And as Cheryl said, we talk to law firms all the time. We talk to corporate legal departments all the time. So we're kind of there on the ground listening and understanding the way that people are using this technology. I personally also consult through LegalTech Hub with a number of firms on their AI projects, AI strategies, as well as the execution of those strategies, and have presented to quite a few firms over the course of the year on AI, its evolution, its risks, how to mitigate those risks, the benefits in practice, and so on. Most recently and topically, given today, we have also surveyed the legal market globally for how law firms are using generative AI. So watch out for those results in a little bit more detail over the coming weeks. But this is the first time, Cheryl, that I'm going to be providing a little bit of a sneak peek into the results of those surveys, which were quite comprehensive. So we surveyed all of AmLaw 100, the top Canadian and Australian firms, the top 50 firms in the UK, as well as some of the larger European firms.
Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I'm so glad you guys are all here to hear this, because like I was saying in my post, I have no idea what's going to happen today, so I'm very excited about it. And Nikki, you have, I think you said it was 2,200 products, different products in the LegalTech Hub platform, right?
Yeah, we have actually over 2,300 now. And one of the features that we added this year, because obviously people were interested in it, is the ability to actually filter by whether those products are leveraging generative AI or large language model technology. So you can look at the entire list of legal technology solutions and then filter down to those that have already worked this technology into their backend.
I love it. See, so that's brilliant. All right, cool. Well, let's jump right in. Let's get crazy. So, I mean, where do you want to start then? Because you have this secret survey. Do you have a thing that you want to jump in with?
Well, I think probably the overwhelming thing is to say we are now at the end of 2023, and it has been a banger year for legal technology. And I, for one, am uber impressed by the way that law firms have tackled this issue. I think in some ways it's been quite surprising because in the past, law firms, for all kinds of reasons, right? I mean, we talk about the lawyer personality and risk averse natures and that kind of thing. But I think going beyond that, because that's a little bit unfair to lawyers who I think had they more time and more time to train and so on, would be more interested in adopting technology than they are when they're under such time pressure and such budget pressure. But so more than the nature of lawyers, I think the structures of law firms make it quite difficult to adopt new technologies and new ways of doing things. And yet, in 2023, we have seen a really phenomenal effort by those working in law firms to do something completely new, incorporate projects around generative AI, when at the beginning of this year, budgets had not anticipated this, resources had not anticipated this, project plans and strategies were chock full for the year already. So people, all of those resources were already slated elsewhere. And yet firms got underway in large droves with real initiatives around generative AI. So that to me is probably the most admirable thing this year, is that we really saw firms get very busy with this stuff, even though they really were not prepared or equipped to deal with it at the outset. And that's something new from law firms, to see them react very rapidly, and I would say quite effectively, to such a changing landscape.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's one of those things that I think has been very different from advice I've given people in the past. It's like, oh, well, if we get past January, February, and you're not already in part of the plan, part of the resource plan, the budget plan, you're probably not going to get in this year with a big thing. 2023 just destroyed that concept because they found a way to do it in a way that we've never seen before. And it's been wildly exciting.
Right. And I think one of the questions we asked in the survey was, to what extent is your firm leadership behind initiatives around generative AI on a scale of 1 to 10? And one thing that I'd like to highlight in this discussion as well is the difference we're seeing in different regions. And specifically today, I will be commenting about the differences in the US compared to the UK. But the law firms we surveyed in the US said that out of one, on a scale of 1 to 10, law firm leadership was at a level 8
Wow.
of buy-in to this type of a project. And that's extremely high, given, this is a technology project, often not the highest priority at firms. Interestingly, in the UK, and this kind of sets the scene for the difference in the two regions, it hovers closer to a 6. So the US firms really bought in quickly to this, which I think is one of the reasons they were able to act so quickly.
And do you think that difference, like the thing that jumps out at me is GDPR and some of the rulemaking around the use of AI and the limitations there. Do you think that's what's driving it, or what do you think is driving that differentiator?
Yeah, it's a good question, Cheryl. That's an astute point. It could well be data privacy issues and GDPR. I get the sense, though, that it's something a little deeper. So there are two things that I would highlight. But first, I just want to say that this is very unusual. In the past, if people had asked me what region pulls ahead when it comes to legal innovation, I would always have said the UK.
Exactly.
Magic Circle firms have been doing this stuff for a lot longer. In a lot of ways, I think they are more sophisticated, or have been, when it comes to innovation. Although I will say that over the past 5 years, I think that gap has been closing. This year is the first year where, about the middle of the year, I started having this sense that, the tables have turned. The US is pulling ahead in this race. I think it's largely because of the availability of CoCounsel in the US, which may seem like a very circumstantial and very specific thing that perhaps wouldn't have carried so much weight, but Casetext was an established entity. It had credibility. It was an organization that already understood the way that law firms had to work when it came to security and data privacy and confidentiality. People trust Casetext. And they already had this vast body of structured legal content that they could draw upon when they were working with GPT-4. So the availability of CoCounsel, and of course that content was specific to the US jurisdiction, which meant that CoCounsel, in order to gain access to its full potential, you really had to be located in the US. So I think that's one thing, is it allowed firms to relatively safely jump on board early. And many firms did. So again, in our survey, those that piloted or even licensed large language model technology this year in the US, predominantly that was CoCounsel. And we know that when CoCounsel launched in March this year, they launched having already beta tested the technology with something like 40 law firms and then multiple corporate legal departments as well. And they gained early access to GPT-4, where there were some law firms in the US that were actually already underway with this technology prior to the launch of GPT-4 publicly. And in some cases, even as early as late 2022. So that's one reason why I think the US has pulled ahead. The other is something I'm going to call the Legal Skeptics Society of the United Kingdom. And it is not as organized as a society, but I do think there's a slight difference in attitude. And this is a broad generalization, and I do love the Brits and love spending time in England, but there is more skepticism and cynicism than there is typically in the US, where we tend to be very optimistic, very enthusiastic, jump in, head first, 2 feet first, however you want to call it. And we had those skeptics come out of the UK really boldly this year. And I think that may have colored things a little bit for those working over there as well. People had many more questions around, is this really useful? Whereas all of the conversations I've had in the US has been, yes, this is incredibly useful. It's transformative. We need to get in there and start playing with it. So I do think that there was just a difference in attitude that also perhaps colored the way that law firms approach this.
That's really interesting. And it's funny because I just did a video log with Horace from Cynthia. And the thing he asked me was, what was the most impactful thing that happened in 2023? And he thought I was going to say a whole bunch of other things. And I was like, Casetext. Like, whether or not you used it or not, it changed the way that we approached legal tech, because it was already in, it was already trusted, it was already there. A lot of big firms already owned it, even if they owned a Westlaw or Lexis product as well. So it just got us over that first kind of early adopter hurdle and put us straight into the middle of things in a way that we've never experienced before.
That's right.
Amazing. So then, all right, so if people are jumping in both feet, head first, whatever we're saying, what are they starting with? Are there certain projects or initiatives that are emerging as kind of the leaders?
So I'm going to throw a few stats in here now. One of the things was we asked who has piloted one of these technologies that is, generative AI first, kind of, or large language model first. Have you actually licensed it? Because I think there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah.
And then in the alternative, have you leveraged an API into a foundation model through a secure sandbox, for example? In the US, there were 66% of firms have piloted a generative AI tool this year. And 40% of US firms have actually licensed, and these are respondents, of course. And on the chatbot front, 55% of US firms have moved forwards with some sort of a proprietary chatbot. So when we were talking about build this year, that wasn't just like, oh, one or two firms have done this. A large number of firms got underway with something that some would call building. I think that there's a quibble around what it actually means to build, because I think that means something a little bit different with this technology, but we can move into that, Cheryl. But however you describe it, over half of the responding firms in AMLO 100 got underway with some sort of proprietary chatbot. And in fact, 50% of UK respondents did as well. Whereas in the UK, far fewer firms piloted or licensed technology off the shelf.
Very interesting. So yeah, can we talk a little bit about the build, buy, the whole debate? Because I was texting with you and telling you I was having a conversation at LegalTech Summit about a firm who said that they were building their own internal large language model, and I thought that was a little bonkers. So
from scratch. I think we need to say from scratch.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I thought, wow, that's maybe not where I would choose to start. But interested to hear kind of what the build debate or how you're seeing that shape.
Yeah, I think that's very unusual, deciding to build a large language model from scratch when you're a law firm. I would say that's an unusual decision, and I will withhold any qualitative assessments because I don't know, why they're doing it.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it's unusual, and it's a very difficult thing to do. So that's build at the kind of highest level. Most firms are not doing that. When in the past, when we have talked about buy versus build, it is because most of the time, if you're solving a problem internally or an external problem that has been highlighted for law firms or corporate legal departments, there is third-party technology suitable for addressing that particular use case or pain point, either in and of itself or through a bricolage approach, layering that technology with another technology. Generally speaking, those kinds of solutions already exist. So to decide to actually build something, to build technology yourself, is a bold decision that should not be taken lightly. It requires enormous numbers of resources beyond what deployment of a third-party technology does, in addition to which it also requires maintenance of that technology and can lead to tech debt and all kinds of issues down the track. Plus, law firms, it's terrific that we now have developers and data scientists and data analysts increasingly working with law firms, but the bread and butter of law firms still is not technology development. And if you don't have to develop it, the sound wisdom is you don't unless there is a genuine competitive advantage to be had. And so that remains true. The difference here is, in order to safely use large language model technology within a firm, you have to deploy it in a different way than simply providing a web interface and saying to your lawyers, have at it, access ChatGPT. Right. That's not safe. We all know that. So I think when it comes to the build buy conundrum, it's less of a dichotomy when we're looking at large language model technology, because when people are talking about building proprietary chatbots, what they're really often talking about is leveraging the API from a foundation model through a secure internal environment, which is not really building. It's a different way of deploying the technology. But then what a number of firms have done, and many more in the US, in fact, I know of only one or two firms in the UK that have done this, but many of the firms in the US that did this kind of deployment of the technology through an API went steps further to fine-tune the model using internal data, but also to add things onto it from an engineering perspective. So to build out the retrieval augmented generation capabilities that allow them to use it very specifically internally for use cases where you can point the model at a specific data set and ground the model in that data set for the purpose of generating a response, which makes it much safer to use because, and more reliable, because it's far less likely than to hallucinate. And you're ensuring that you're getting good sound responses. So that's another layer of build, but it's one that makes a lot of sense when you're dealing with a technology that is risky if you don't build out those components to it. So those are my thoughts on build versus buy. I'm curious, Cheryl, whether you have heard other things about this debate through your series on AI.
Yeah, no, so I think what you're hearing is exactly kind of what I'm hearing, is that, I think of it as customization or configuration, but not necessarily a full-on build, more of taking it kind of into your environment. I wonder, have you heard where people are pulling things? I'm assuming they're going mostly into Azure. Do we know that? Have we heard anything about that when they're bringing it in-house?
Yeah, a lot of people are using Azure. Some have used Lega, which is Christian Lang's new technology, which is a third-party sandbox that comes with. It's interesting because it provides the security, but it also allows for governance. So you can add training and kind of policy that sits around people's use of the technology. And then when OpenAI came out with their enterprise model, some are also just leveraging that. Of course, that is slightly less useful than using the Azure environment or Lega because it prevents you from swapping out models in the same way. And you're still dealing with some of the limitations of ChatGPT itself. But those are the most common things that we've seen this year.
Yeah, when I think too, beyond risk, I think the secret sauce is going to be in combining it with your internal knowledge, any of these tools, right? I think pointing it at your internal data sets, at your internal knowledge, the way that you can bring together public and internal knowledge and sources, I think is going to be where all the sexy stuff happens in this kind of world.
I agree with you, although what's interesting is that I mean, this was also a really interesting year for the number of swings and roundabouts we saw over the course of the year in terms of how people were using the technology,
Right.
and also how quickly things evolved and how people discovered what things were actually useful. So in terms of adoption cycles, we saw people piloting CoCounsel, or in the UK, Harvey, early on. That was the number one way that people were using the technology. Then we moved into leveraging, the APIs through an internal sandbox. And then we saw people adding on and building additional components, as well as fine tuning. And by the end of the year, what we are hearing is that fine tuning the model, so actually reinforcing the model with your own internal data, is often less effective than you think it's going to be.
Interesting.
But what does work, so our RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that is far more effective. So just pointing at a data set for the purpose of an answer is much more effective than actually fine-tuning, reinforcing on your data. The one thing I will say, and this is where I think we're going for next year, is legal large language models, so LLMs. Models that have already been pre-fine-tuned on sound legal data. So it's the foundation model plus a large set of legal content that somebody else who has the expertise has done that reinforcement training. And then you add RAG, you add RAG internally. That is, I think, where we're seeing some significant developments. And you now have quite a few companies out there that are providing those legal large language models. And so that, I think that's quite interesting. And that's probably more effective than a law firm trying to do that themselves.
Exactly. So do you have names that you can share out? I know True Law is doing one, doing legal large language models. I think Mosaic ML, but be interested in hearing because I know sometimes it's hard to find, sharing with folks.
Yeah. So 273 Ventures, Dan Katz and Michael Bomarito, they provide large language model that they're then able to set up in your system. Maxime is another one providing that. iLevel is another one. So there are quite a few now out there, and I'm happy to send you a list.
Yeah, and I'll put it in
that
the
would be helpful that we can put
yeah.
under this video or
Yeah.
When people watch later.
It can be so hard to find these things. That's the reason you and I have both been buyers and been like, well, okay, great, but they're out there. What are they? Tell me about them, right?
Right. It's hard to find them. And also, I think the harder thing as well is what's the veracity? How much trust do we put in players that have actually taken large language models and then added legal content? Like if that legal content is coming from sources that we don't know terribly well. There, for example, GitHub has been interesting. There have been all of these data sources that have emerged, like training data sets to support this kind of reinforcement training on legal data. But again, they're coming from people we don't know. So it's not just finding the providers, it's finding providers where we trust them and trust the sources of their legal content and data.
So many follow-up questions there. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a really good question. I'm talking about firms fine-tuning things. Are they actually doing that where they're changing the large language model, or are they using kind of prompt engineering and architecting when we're talking about fine-tuning? Are you seeing one versus the other?
So that's the difference I meant between like using RAG, which is basically just pointing it at something, or doing the fine tuning. We did go through a phase where firms were trying to fine tune it on their data, but I think we've found that is not as useful as just actually pointing the model and grounding the model in specific data sets for the purpose of generating responses.
Excellent.
I just need to add as well that when you're looking at use cases, legal research is not a great use case for this technology.
What?
It's just not. There's for those who haven't read it, there's an excellent paper put out by Travers Smith in the UK. Sean Curran is one of the authors, and it's called "Hallucination is the Last Thing You Need." And what they have done a really phenomenal job of developing a particular architecture for their internal use cases around large language models. And they have found that even using retrieval augmented generation, you can get hallucinations, very subtle hallucinations, in use cases where you might not necessarily expect it as well. And it's quite worrisome. And so for legal research, I don't think that's where the best uses for this technology. And I think a lot of firms are agreeing with that. So when we're looking at use cases that people have gotten underway with, summarization is one of the real key areas, as well as data normalization.
I love that. So it's funny, we've been talking a lot about in the industry about like what are the use cases and really about generative AI. It's a question that I am asking is, do lawyers actually want to stop writing as part of this universe, right? And Horace Wu said something the other day that telling lawyers that they don't have to write motions and briefs anymore is akin to telling a mechanic that good news, you don't have to work on engines anymore. But that's the thing you probably like doing. That's the part of the job you like, right? So it's some of these other areas, I think, especially summarization. I think about how much time I've seen lawyers spend slaving away over an email where they're summarizing a complex document for a client. If you could do that in less time, that's not fun. People don't enjoy doing that. That's not the fun part of your job, right? So curious to dig into use cases a little bit more. Are there other ones that are emerging that are interesting?
Yeah, so from our survey results, it's one thing to pilot technology or to leverage the technology through an internal, sandbox that you then allows people to experiment with it. And most of this year was spent by people experimenting. Um, and there are some notable exceptions to that. Firms that did get underway early with CoCounsel, we're hearing that they have 50% upwards of adoption rates across lawyers in terms of them using it every day or 3 times a week or something like that, like a very high adoption rate,
Yeah.
especially for new technology. Some of the firms that deployed chatbots early also have pretty high rates of adoption, but again, those are still experimental use cases rather than things underway with actual client data built into workflows and so on. But in the US, 50% of responding firms had active business use cases underway. So active use cases on the operational or business side of the firm. And these were predominantly where we're seeing most use there is around billing data and time entry normalization. That's a very common one. 40% have active legal use cases underway. And that I think is high
Yes.
for year one, right? Especially given that so much of this year was about experimenting, rightfully, spending time experimenting to figure out where is this technology useful and what are the use cases, in fact. So 40% had legal use cases underway, and we asked how many practices they had legal use cases actively underway, and these ranged from between 1 and 10 practice areas. And the use cases, and it was not a mandatory question to provide specific use cases on the legal side, but some responded. And so summarization and review and querying were some of the kind of core functionality areas where this is useful. So we are seeing much more adoption of the technology than I think we might have expected by this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those stats are really, really exciting. And I think the fact that they are pointing things at operational use cases as well is, there's so much money laying around back there where there's just things we can do better. And I think I was talking to somebody at TLTF Summit about billing and time entries and like what a mess that whole universe is. We've been trying to solve that from the pricing side and from the AFA side for so long. And I think that's a massive use case that a law firm could draw immediately value from without actually putting at risk anything that's client facing.
Right. And not surprising. I mean, these are smart people, and you look at this new technology and you think, where can we get tremendous value early without it being high risk? And the operational side, where there's a ton of data, is one of those areas, not least because one of the best use cases for this technology is also data normalization and classification. So when you have those kinds of projects, this is really useful technology. And scaling data normalization, there are a number of tools that have emerged this year as well, specifically using large language models for the purpose of normalizing data at scale. So it is a real focus area.
Well, and the other thing that I really love, I remember at the beginning of the year, and I think you and I both commented on it, there was a certain thought leader in legal tech who said knowledge management's dead as a field. And I think what we're actually seeing now that we're getting to the end of the year is that I feel like the knowledge management folks are going to be the new cool kids in 2024, because that care and feeding, they used to take so many resources and so much time. We now have support. We have this technology to support us and make it better.
I mean, I thought the KM folks were always the cool folks.
Me too.
But no, I
Yeah.
100% agree with you. I mean, data is more important than ever. So some of the other questions that we will be reporting on were around data and how many firms were motivated as a result of this technology to get underway with data projects when they hadn't previously done so. And many firms have used this as that sort of jumping off point that they needed in order to tackle their internal data models. So that's very interesting to me. And it certainly goes broadly against, and any kind of assessment that KM is dead, because KM is, people think a bit of it around content and kind of research, but in fact, it's data, right? It's data stewardship and information stewardship and management, which is more important now than ever. So I think you're right. One of the interesting things, I think, is that we're going to see a new form of precedent document. So some of the firms that have legal use cases underway have spent a long time really figuring out how to optimize prompts to achieve a certain output and a very high quality output. And as many of us now know, it's not as simple as asking one question. To get a really solid output, you need to ask questions and then refine those and add in context of various different kinds. And they have now developed prompts that are something like a page and a half long in some instances to achieve certain outputs reliably. And they're kind of like templates or precedents, because what you do as a user is you understand then where you need to input what information. And so you provide that specific information in the structure of the prompt that has already been pre-created for you to address that particular use case. And once you've done that, then you submit and your output is much better. And I could imagine a situation where we have all of these AI components, a large part of which is this prompt or set of prompts, a prompt chain in a certain structure that has already been optimized by the technical team. But then that's another form of KM, is managing those prompts, updating them, continuing to test and iterate them as the technology changes and evolves, making sure that they're still providing the best output, and so on. So that, I think, is a fascinating area where KM is really going to intersect with the technology and the technologists. And I think there'll need to be an even tighter bridge between those groups into the future as a result.
That is so interesting. I hadn't even considered this as a thing. Wow. Okay. You've blown my mind a little bit, and that's what I was hoping for. So one of the debates that we've had amongst the legal tech universe of talking is really around this whole prompt engineer thing. Do I need to go out and take a class on prompt engineering? And my attitude has largely been, if you're a lawyer, probably not. But it sounds like if you're in some of these roles, there's value to really becoming an expert and having some deep learning in the prompt engineering space. But what do you think?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I teach a course on legal technology where I had to completely redo the curriculum this year, obviously, to accommodate everything that was happening. So my students are set typically 3 writing assignments over the course of the semester. And then they have a final project that they undertake in a technology. They actually develop a prototype. This year, they had to use AI for all of those written assignments. They had to, it was mandatory. And with each of those assignments, they also had to provide an addendum, which indicated which AI tool they had used to do the initial draft. They had to, of course, refine it, edit it, add sources, and so on. But also, what prompts had they used? How did those work? What would they do differently next time? How much time did they think they saved? And so on. Some of them did this assignment in a different chatbot each time. Some of them used the same one, but evolved their prompting techniques over time. And I did teach them about prompt engineering. And as I was doing so, I did think, look, much of this will be built into the back end ultimately. That is true. That's true. The chat interface is really easy to adopt, but it's also a lot of responsibility on the lawyers to try to figure out how to do this best. And they're probably not the ones who need to be figuring out what is the correct structure for this prompt, so sure. But I think in the interim period, it's really worth learning about for a number of reasons. One is Right now, you do need to be good at prompting to get a good output. So if you're going to leverage the technology in the next little while, you should know about it. But the second is understanding how it works allows you to understand also when it's not working and when you're not getting good output and when maybe something needs to be changed in the prompt architecture, whether that's at the front end or the back end. So having some sort of an understanding of how this works is important. So I wouldn't say go out and do courses, but something like half of the firms that we surveyed in the US had already taught their lawyers, their full lawyer population, about prompt engineering. That's a smaller subset than those that had provided education more generally. But I think 50% is a fairly significant number.
And do you know how they were doing? Were they doing that through live classes or like just making resources available? If you know, I'm just super intrigued by that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I actually don't know the answer, but I do know that there are a number of different providers that have been offering training. And some of that training is generically around what is this technology, what are the risks, etc. But others are full curriculums that also include some education around prompt engineering.
Yeah, and I think I'm trying to think. I think Legal Design School is the new one that's out. That they have some prompt engineering courses that are specific to legal. But I find like I just screw around with it, and if the output isn't good, then I go and see, okay, what are other people doing to get the output that they want? So I think even using it actively, even if you're not using it for work in your personal life or in kind of the stuff you're working for on the side, helps develop that expertise and that kind of gets that mental brain going in that right. It's like reading Shakespeare. You have to
Right,
get your mindset
right.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
We have an interesting question. This person says, some of our current providers are trying to sell us AI enhancements on software we already have. So like e-billing, CLM, things like that. Without getting into dollar amounts, what are thoughts or philosophies on how AI enhancement of existing products should be priced? And how would you go about valuing those enhancements?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Um, I think what we've seen this year is a lot of vendors building generative AI widgets and features into their technology because it's the hot topic, not because it adds particular value. So I would always understand exactly what additional value you're getting from that AI component, because if it's just the ability to translate a clause in real time, that's not adding something for which you should be paying more. But if it's a very thoughtful change in the back-end architecture to bring you fundamentally more value from the product because it's able to address more use cases or it's able to do things better and it's costing the vendor more, then I think it makes sense for them to pass some of that cost onto you, especially when it means you are getting higher value for it. Someone like a large research company that is building AI into its different products and charging significantly more for it, I think it's not cool to charge that before you actually see those products and again can evaluate what additional value they're bringing to you and your users. So I would be pretty strong on that point about waiting and being able to see for yourself what that value is. Just waving the flag and saying we have AI and we have AI and it is not enough to jack the prices, right? But I will say one other thing that everyone should be doing is reevaluating their existing technology stack and looking at where ultimately it will make sense to swap things out because of overlap that is inevitably coming down the road, or because the new technology will be able to do things fundamentally better than old technology. And if your existing providers don't recognize that and are not building this in, someone else will be, and that will be worth a consideration down the track. And I will say that almost all of the firms that we canvassed had either already started doing that work or were going to be doing it next year. So I think we'll see a lot of change in the legal tech ecosystem of law firms over the next little while for these reasons.
Man, you hit on so much in that. That was a bonkers amount of information. So yeah, I'm working with a mid-sized firm right now, like 140 lawyers. They're looking at every piece of their tech stack, nose to tail, because if anything that's due for a renew, why would we not consider fundamentally whether or not that tool is taking us into the next, 5 years, whatever the contract length is. And I think, one of the things that's so cool about this, generative AI in general is all the things that we've been telling lawyers, like, I'm sorry, we can't do that. Like, we're going to have to, it's going to take 9 different tools that you're going to have to go through to accomplish that. We have to revisit all those conversations and decisions at this point because so much of that stuff is possible now.
Right, right. Things are actually possible now that just were not possible before, which I think is fascinating. But also, if you look at contract review tools as an example, look, there is UI that has been built out around some of those tools where that's highly valuable, regardless of the technology in the back end. It is tried and trusted. It fits within user workflows. But at a certain point, if those tools are requiring you to expend resources to train the algorithm because the AI architecture is old, that needs to flip. Like the AI that is available now does not require you to show it 250 examples of a clause before you know that the algorithm will precisely and, almost all of the time be able to identify that clause correctly. But there will be a point at which this slips where you'll have new providers that have done the work of building out the UI and they have the new technology, and that's when you should make the jump.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is too, right? ROI is still the thing that we need to be looking at when we're looking at tool, right? So whether or not it's cool or not, are you going to make more money off it? Are you going to be able to do this with less people? Are you going to be able to offer new services? Those are still the things we're thinking about, right?
100%. Like what, and will your users use it? I mean, and
Step
yes,
one.
chat interface is great, and it makes it easy for people to use and adopt something, but a chat interface is not the right interface for everything you do in legal, especially when you're working in Word, right? Like you need to be able to provide it to your lawyers where they work in a way that will enable them to build it into their workflow. That has not changed. One really important thing to note is because so much of this year was about experimentation with Gen AI, even though we have some legal use cases underway already, they are not scaled. So 2024 is the year that we will see those firms that have already gotten started deploying this technology and putting it in the hands of their lawyers. That is the year where we will see them scale those use cases. With the scale is where you will really get the value. That's where you'll see the significant productivity gains, because it's not just 1 or 2 people in a small pilot group in a sprint. It is an entire practice area that is actually getting underway with that as an ongoing use case in action. But that scaling comes back to all of the work that KM and innovation professionals have been doing for years. We move back to adoption and change management. We then need to think again about how does this actually fit within the workflow? It's better, but how will you access it? When will you access it? How do we ensure that you actually do access it when you're supposed to, so that it has the effect of transforming that work and digitizing that work? And so that hard work is coming. The other thing, Cheryl, I think importantly is firms that did not get on the experimentation train in 2023, they won't be in a position to do that scaling work in 2024. They're going to be still experimenting. And so I do think this is where we're going to see that gap between those that are out in front and those that are lagging behind start to grow. And I would be concerned if I was one of the firms that was not yet in a position to start scaling. I would be a little concerned by that.
Right, you're going to get outrun pretty quickly, I think. The thing I love about this, though, and you can hear it, your excitement as much as mine, is like all the stuff we've been doing for the past 20 years in innovation They're listening, experimenting. Who knew we could put money aside and time aside to experiment, and maybe it turns out into nothing, or we decide that's not the right approach. We've actually accepted that as our reality in 2023, and I think it's probably the sexiest thing that we could take away from from the whole kind of
So
AI thing.
some, I will say not all firms, right?
No, not
Not
all
all
firms, but
firms,
some of
but
them.
you're
More
right.
so than it used to be. Yeah.
Some of one of the most exciting things I heard about a firm, for example, that had fully adopted agile practices for
Wow.
their experimentations this year. And we're identifying use cases per practice group. And then with that practice group, working in agile groups, sprints with groups of about 5 lawyers to test over a 2-week period whether or not that use case was in fact viable. In other words, does it in fact produce a productivity gain that justifies the change? And if it didn't, after 2 weeks, that's it. Nope, cross that one off the list. Move on to the next one. That's exciting stuff. I agree. That's very sexy. That is like law firms can do R&D. Who knew?
Oh, right. Yeah, well, and I did that session at ILTACon with a couple other folks on agile project management, and the room it was a big room and the room was full. And I was like, are you guys really here for agile project management? What's happening? But it must be this. It must be that this is how people are approaching some of their experimentation. So that explains it. It's not just that I'm awesome.
Oh no, I think it's because you're awesome,
It's
Cheryl.
mostly that. Let's go with that. A couple of questions coming in. One is kind of thinking about people who are working on legal technology, innovation, things like that. So not necessarily the lawyers. What kind of skills and education and professional development should they be looking at around AI? You know, given how quickly things are changing, like what are you telling people to look at or learn or go do?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, firms have been hiring new types of skill sets. So more firms than ever before this year hired data scientists and data analysts. That I think will continue. For people who already work in this area, your skills around driving adoption and change management are still valuable more so than ever, I think, as we move towards the next few years. And so are a lot of your other skills. It's still about problem identification, use case identification, and then, finding the solutions that actually fit the needs of the people and deliver that value. But I think it's really important to understand how this technology works, what questions to be asking providers, how this technology combined with other technology can give rise to even more effective solutions. So I think, for example, that low code plus AI is an area we will see enormous growth, because when we have to build AI components into workflows, we're going to need something to help us there. Understand how the technology works. So read what you can and use this technology every day yourself, every day. Use it every day. Bookmark ChatGPT, Claude, Bard, Bing, like anything you can use and get your hands on. Find ways to experiment with it yourself, ask it things yourself, use all of the different aspects of it, put photos in and see what it can do with that. Ask it to generate videos or images, see what it can do. Use it, experiment with it, as well as reading everything that you can so that you are fluent. You don't have to be an AI expert, but you need to know at least as much as the lawyers around you who are themselves going in and experimenting with this technology.
I think that's right. The way the thing I keep going back to is if you're getting chased by a bear, you just need to outrun the next slowest person. And so, right, you just need to stay ahead of the lawyers. You need to just stay ahead of the next guy, basically. And so, you don't have to be an expert. You don't need to be a scientist, but just keep reading, keep absorbing new stuff, and read stuff from different sources. I think is really important too,
I
because there's a
agree.
lot of screaming at the different ends of like, this is going to save the world. This is going to end the world. You probably want a little taste of both.
Right. And I think also things are more accessible than they have been in the past because everyone has been learning this year, even data scientists. This is new to literally everyone. There are law firms that have put out research papers. There are all kinds of primary sources, like actual journal articles and so on, that are fascinating. Like I've been reading academic papers again, and they're not beyond the layperson, right? Like, this is stuff you can read and access, and it's really worth delving in because it will give you the ability to understand, why is summarization such a useful function of this technology, or what are the subtle reasons why we need to be really concerned about hallucinations. And it will help you when it comes to providing value to your professional firms or environments. So yeah, educate yourselves.
Stay up to date. I love it. All right, so 2 minutes to go. Looks like no more active questions. Oh, well, last question we hear a lot, and so there's probably not a ton to say on it, but how do you address the kind of, well, if we get more efficient, we bill less kind of approach?
I was impressed to see that 50% of AmLaw respondents had already initiated discussions with their management about valuing legal work in the future. None of the UK firms had. Also an interesting difference.
Ooh.
There is a balance to be struck between chilling the experimental landscape and being realistic about what this might mean for the future. I do think that's a line that you need to tread carefully, but that excuse has been an excuse that has been used for years and years with every type of new technology introduced into law firms, and I don't really view it as a viable excuse. It's kind of like saying, we want to do things worse and slower because it's better for a bottom line. No, that's, our professional obligations are to serve our clients well. And if we're able to operate faster, we need to find a way of doing that. And I do think it will give rise to new discussions about, how we look at and value and price legal work. And that's a good thing. That's where we should have been headed for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. In my position, although I'm in a great position because I get to choose who I work with as an outside consultant, is, when I run into somebody who's singing that song, I say, you're not for me. I'm going to move over here and work with somebody who's not singing that song, because
Right.
I think by 2025, you're going to be in the dust, right? When you think about these firms that are already experimenting, already doing these things, already talking about how do we make money? Because obviously we need to make money. This is how we pay the bills. This is how we eat.
And clients know that as well.
Right.
But yeah, I think there are some firms that will not survive this. That's
I
my
totally agree. Yeah. And I don't think it's a long time coming. I think this is a short horizon, 2 years probably. We see things start to fall apart with some of the firms that aren't competing. That's me being aggressive. I don't know if everyone else feels more as aggressive as that, but this is all moving so quick. I think there's going to be a lot of things that shake out, both very positively and for folks who aren't participating rather negatively.
my horizon is maybe a little bit longer, but I do think we'll start to see things shake up in the next 2 years. But I think in about 5 years, we may see some firms really start to fall.
To struggle, yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you again. This has been so awesome. I wonder if there's anything that you want to tell us about upcoming LegalTech Hub events or anything like that you want to share before we close out.
Well, we have 4 events next year. We have one in the Bay Area for corporate legal. We have one in London in the UK on innovation and AI. And stay tuned for the rest. We will also be issuing more detail on our surveys that I referenced in this webinar. So stay tuned for that. That will start coming out next week. And if anyone is interested in talking to LegalTech Hub about our premium resources that sit behind a paywall, but help law firm innovation and KM people, reach out to me and I will happily take you through it. And Cheryl,
Excellent.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again. This has been just as informative and interesting as I thought it would. So thank you again. Thanks to everybody who joined us here today. And thanks to everybody who's listening to the replay. Thanks again, Nikki.
Thanks, Cheryl. Take care.
Thanks.